All right, hi everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. This is our Legislation Over Lunch event with the California Program of Defenders of Wildlife. We're really excited to see all of your squares here, and hopefully we have a little bit of chance for interaction towards the end with our question and answer period. So my name's Monica, and I'm the coordinator for our California program. Before we jump in, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples whose unceded land and territory we work on. I'm joining today from the ancestral lands of the Kumeyaay people, and our California field office in Sacramento is located on the ancestral homeland of the Maidu, Miwok, and Mewuk peoples, who are the Indigenous peoples of this land and have lived here since time immemorial. So the way the event's going to work is you're going to get a little overview of Defenders as an organization from our California Program Director, Pamela Flick, and then we'll be hearing from our consultant and founding California Director, Kim Delfino, about the legislative process in our state and what's happening with wildlife this session. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pam to get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're so glad to see you, even if it has to be virtual for now. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from northeastern Sacramento County, which is the traditional lands of the Nishinan people who have lived here since time immemorial. Defenders was founded in 1947 as Defenders of Fur Bearers, and we are dedicated to the protection of all native animals and plants in their natural communities. Defenders envisions diverse wildlife populations in North America that are secure, thriving, and sustained by a network of healthy lands and waters. And we work on a wide array of species, habitats, and issues throughout the continent, including those that you see here and countless others. So as I said, the Defenders works throughout the country, from our Washington, D.C. headquarters, which is the yellow star on the East Coast, where we actively participate in shaping federal legislation on Capitol Hill, to the desert Southwest, to Alaska, to Florida, and many places in between. I have stars indicated here on the map where some of our field offices are located. Not every single field office is here, but we do work in 13 states. And we also have a longtime consultant who works for us in Mexico. Bringing it to California, we work throughout the Golden State on a variety of landscapes and on a broad set of issues, from the expansive deserts to the coastal and marine environments along our iconic coastline, to the Sierra Nevada, Cascades, and intercoastal ranges, to the vast Central Valley and its wetlands, and the San Francisco Bay Delta, which is the largest estuary on the entire west coast of our nation. We also dedicate a significant portion of our time working on renewable energy and related issues, including transmission and procurement planning, which of course is critically important to achieving our ambitious carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reduction, and climate goals that we've set here in California. So this is the California program staff, and we are small but mighty, currently with 6 members and scattered throughout the state. We also have a number of terrific consultants on our team, including our founding California program director, Kim Delfino, who contracts with us now on a number of issues, among them state legislative advocacy. Of course, good environmental policy often begins with good legislation, and sometimes equally important is fighting bad legislative proposals before they become law. So Kim will share more about the legislative process and our priority bills that are moving through the process this session. So with that, take it away, Kim.
Thank you, Pam. Well, let me just start off by saying I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate Defenders and their work in California, and also for all of you that are taking time in your lunch to learn more about what's going on in California. I do want to acknowledge that I'm working from my home in Sacramento, and as noted by Monica, this is on ancestral lands of the Maidu, Miwok, Nissen, and Miwok Indigenous peoples. So let me start off by just talking a little bit about California legislative process, and I would like to just start by talking about why we focus on legislation in California. And we have a very robust legislative process for Defenders of Wildlife, and we're very lucky in that we are working in a state that has progressive environmental policies, that has a progressive legislature, a progressive administration, and also a very organized environmental community. So we work in partnership with lots of other nonprofit organizations that span the gamut, from large environmental groups to local environmental groups to environmental justice organizations. And so it's a really organized and well-connected group of people, so we're able to get good policy done. And we have had success in the past. Some of the highlights have been when California was the first state to phase out the use of lead ammunition in hunting as part of the effort to protect California condors and other raptors who were suffering from lead poisoning when they eat animals that have been shot with lead. We also have had a lot of conservation planning laws that have been passed that Defenders of Wildlife has been part of, including update to the Natural Communities Conservation Planning Act, improvements to the California Endangered Species Act, safe harbor agreements, and the regional conservation investment strategies that just were passed a couple of years ago. And then we've also been very successful in securing dollars for conservation. So money that's in the bonds that we've seen that have gone on the ballot measures, Defenders has been part of those, as well as securing tax checkoffs on our state income tax forms to benefit sea otters and sea otter research, and other funding for our various wildlife conservation priorities. So let me talk a little bit about just, how a bill becomes a law. Before I get to the bill introduction part, let me just tell you a little bit about, because there's a lot of work that goes in before a bill is even introduced. First, you just have to come up with an idea for the bill, and that comes out of our policy work, as Pam had noted. So Defenders of Wildlife has a very busy policy set of policy experts in California, as well as in Washington, D.C. And so first we come up with an idea of what would be a good change to the law or an improvement. And then we work and we talk with our partners and with agencies to see if this is something that they would agree with and that they think is a good fix. Also to get ideas on what do they think is the best way to go forward with making the change in the law. We look at the politics, who is going to be for the bill, who's going to be against the bill. Does it have a chance of passing? What is the cost going to be associated to it? Is this a year where the budget is a big concern? So maybe we don't try to work on a bill that's going to cost a lot of money. So we think about that. Then we draft the bill. So we put the bill proposal together, and then we put materials together to support why we're moving forward with the bill. And then we start talking about who is the right person to author the bill. So we think about, do we want to start the bill on the Senate side? Do we want to start the bill on the Assembly side? Sometimes it's better to start it in one house versus another because of who the opposition might be in that house, who we might be running into issues with in a policy committee. The Assembly right now tends to be sometimes a harder place to move controversial legislation. So you might want to start it in the Senate, and it'll give you more time to build up support and to address opposition by the time you move it over to the Assembly. And then you once you've identified the house you want to start it in, then you start thinking through who would be the right person to author it. Is it a regional issue? So you might want to work with someone in that region. Is it someone who has a history of working on these issues? Are they the chair of the policy committee or a member of the policy committee for which the bill would be moving through? And then we start thinking through who are the sponsors of the bill. So the sponsor is different than an author. The author is the legislative member who puts the name on their bill. The sponsor is an organization or an entity who is sort of doing all of the policy work and organizing to get the votes. So if Defenders of Wildlife is sponsoring a bill, we would be a sponsor, but sometimes we like to look at other organizations to sponsor with us, depending on what the issue is. Sometimes it's policy expertise. Sometimes we need to show a depth and breadth of support from a wider range of partners. It depends. It depends on what the bill is. And so once we get all that sorted out, then we introduce the bill. So as you'll see, the top yellow box is the bill is introduced. And then once a bill is introduced, it goes to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee decides what policy committee or committees should then hear that bill. Sometimes it's only one policy committee. Sometimes it could be two. I've seen bills that have been triple referred to policy committee. That's always very challenging because we won't go to that slide, but I'm going to have a slide that you'll see the deadlines, but we work under a straight deadline structure. So if you don't make a deadline, your bill dies. So then it's set for policy committee, and you have your policy committee hearing where we would give testimony about the bill. You would have your supporters line up in support. You have the opponents, if there are any, that would line up in opposition, and then the committee would vote on the bill. If the bill makes it out of the policy committee, it then moves to an appropriations committee if it's a bill that costs money or a fiscal bill. And so then you have a committee hearing and you get it, hopefully you move it out of the committee, out of the appropriations committee, and then it goes to the floor of the House, of the first House. So if it's an assembly bill, for example, it'll go to the floor of the assembly for a vote. If it passes off the floor of the assembly for the vote, it'll go to the next House, which would be then the Senate for this example. And you would again go through the same process where you would be referred to your policy committee or policy committees. You would move it through the policy committees. If it's a fiscal bill that costs money, you would have it go to the appropriations committee, and then it would either make it in or get in or out of the appropriations committee. I would just note that appropriations is always tricky because at the end of the day, you've got a lot of bills that are in there, and the leadership for the House you're in is going to be picking and choosing which bills move forward. If your bill has a significant cost associated with it, sometimes that could be a reason why your bill doesn't make it out. Sometimes there's things like bill trading that goes on in the background where the Senate has some controversial bills and they want to move them, and then the Assembly has some, and there's forced trading, and bills live and die sometimes by mysterious acts that we have no idea what was going on in the background if your bill gets held in a committee. Then it goes to the floor for its final floor vote. If the bill has been changed in the second House, and when it goes back to its original, it'll have to go back to its original House for a vote. There is a chance that when it returns to the original House, which is that fourth yellow square down there, you could get it pulled back into a policy committee. That usually only happens with bills that are controversial, but you'll have to rush through off a quick policy committee. And I've had things where bills have moved and we end up doing a policy committee, what they call off the floor, where you literally go into a room off the floor of the House, and you have to have a hearing, and then it gets moved back into back onto the floor for a vote. And if you're able to make it through all of that and it gets voted out, your bill then goes to the governor. And then the governor has a month to decide whether or not to sign the bill or to veto the bill. Or the governor could choose to do nothing. And in California, if the governor chooses to do nothing, then the bill will become law. It's not some states, if there's not proactive action by the governor, then the bill would die. That's called a pocket veto. We don't have that in California. And then, as noted in the green dot there, most bills become law January 1 of the next year, unless your bill is considered an urgency bill, which then it would become law as soon as the governor signs the bill. I just wanted to highlight some of the committees that we work with the most. On the Assembly side, we work with the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee. That would be the one particularly that would deal with endangered species. Then we have the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, fire and a lot of fire bills, forestry bills, CEQA bills move through the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. I'll make a side note, this year, for whatever reason, the Assembly Natural Resources Committee has a huge number of bills assigned to it. They have more than 100 bills that have been assigned to it this year. And the policy consultants are, I think, tearing their hair out a little bit, because they're only going to be able to have 2 committee hearings this year because we're operating under COVID restrictions. And so the committee space is very limited, and most of us are giving testimony remotely, but the members are showing up and some members are in the committee room. And so the Assembly Natural Resources Committee has done something that I haven't seen in a long time, is they've actually sent out requests to members basically saying, like, how important is your bill this year? Because if you're not telling me it's important, we're not going to hear it, because we cannot hear 100 bills in 2 committee hearings. Those committee hearings would last probably 10 hours. Then the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 3, that is the committee that handles all the natural resources and environmental quality issues. The budget is very important. I didn't have a slide in here about the budget, but where money gets spent dictates a lot about policy. And so we also pay very close attention to the budget. That subcommittee hears all of the budgets for all of the agencies that we work with: Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Wildlife Conservation Board, all of the agencies, in fact, within the California Natural Resources Agency, and all of the agencies within the California Environmental Protection Agency, including the Water Board. Also, a lot of times policy does get attached to budget bills. They show up in the form of what they call a budget trailer bill, or it can go in what they call budget bill language, which is direction from the legislature on how money should be spent by the various agencies and departments. On the Senate side, we work very closely with the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee, which is very similar in jurisdiction to Water Parks and Wildlife on the Assembly side. And then Senate Environmental Quality is another committee we work with closely. And then finally, Senate Budget Subcommittee 2, which is very similar to the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 3 that I just talked about. All right, legislative champions, I just wanted to quickly highlight. This is not the full list of champions that we work with, but these are folks that we tend to work with quite a bit, or will be probably working with quite a bit. So Mr. Allen, who is from Santa Monica, John Laird, who came back to the legislature after a long stint as the California Resources Agency Secretary. He is now senator from the Monterey area. He took Senator Bill Monning's seat. Monique Limon, who moved over from the Assembly. She took Hannah Beth Jackson's seat. We believe she's going to be a very strong champion on environmental issues. Mr. Henry Stern, who interestingly started off his career as the legislative assistant for former Senator Fran Pavley. He has her seat now. And then Mr. Bob Wykowski, who also is the chair of the Budget Subcommittee in the Senate that we work on, and then also the chair of Environmental Quality. On the Assembly side, we work very closely with Mr. Richard Bloom from the LA area, Laura Friedman. She used to chair Assembly Natural Resources. She's now moved over to Transportation. We have Eduardo Garcia, who we work with very closely in the Imperial and Coachella Valley. He's a big champion of the Salton Sea and desert conservation work. We have Mr. Kalra from San Jose, who carried an important bill for us last year, AB 3030, which was the bill that actually didn't pass, but did give rise to the governor passing or enacting the executive order that set California as the first state to declare a goal of the state to conserve 30% of our lands and water by 2030. Mr. Rivas from Salinas is also a champion. He actually has 27 bills this year, so he's quite a busy man. And then we have Mark Stone, who's from the Santa Cruz Monterey area. Really quickly, I just want to run through, we have to pay very close attention to deadlines. I started us off where we are now, which is March, April, but just as a precursor, we have deadlines for bill introduction, which this year was in February. We actually have deadlines that precede that, is where you have to get your language into Legislative Council so it can go into bill format. That's in January. But then once everything gets rolling, rocking and rolling, which is where we're at now, we have our policy committee hearings for first bills. And I would note, the legislative session is a 2-year session. We are in the first year of the 2-year session. So bills that aren't able to make it out of their house in the first year, sometimes we'll be able to survive till the next year. But if you don't make it out of the deadlines by year 2, your bill does die. So right now we're in first policy committee. We'll be having those hearings in March and April. Then we have a spring break. Then they come back, and this is the last day for the Appropriations Committee, April 30th for bills that cost money. May 7th is the last day for policy committees. Oh, sorry. April 30th is the last day for policy committees to get their bills out that cost money so they can go to the Appropriations Committee. May 7th is the last day for policy committees to get their bills out that are non-fiscal bills, and they would go straight to the floor. But most bills cost money. So the vast majority of bills go to appropriation. May 21st is the last day for the Appropriations Committee to pass bills. June 4th is the last day for that first house to get its bills out. And I would just note, at the same time, we're also going to be in the middle of a budget process where June 15th is the constitutional deadline for the state to enact its budget. So they have got to get the budget over to the governor by June 15th. So then in June and July, we'll have more policy committees. This will be now in the second house. So all the assembly bills will be over in the Senate, and all of the Senate bills will now be over in the assembly. July 14th is going to be the last day for the policy committees to get their bills out. If your bill does not get out of policy committee, it gets held for the year. It will become a 2-year bill. July 16th through August 16th is going to be the 1-month summer recess that they take a 1-month summer recess every year. This year is interesting. It's just a little later than normal. Usually they break around July 4th, and then they come back in early August. For whatever reason, it's a later recess this year. And then August 27th is the last day for appropriations to get their bills out. And then we will have floor session for about 2 weeks, where there's going to be a massive number of bills that they're going to try to move out. It'll be interesting this year, if we're going to still be under COVID restrictions. That was a big hang up last year. A lot of bills died because they just could not, they literally ran out of time to hear bills because of the COVID restrictions and how cumbersome the process was. And so September 10th is your last day to get your bill out and to the governor's desk. You get it to the governor's desk, then you have a month for the governor to sign the bill. So October 10th is a big day because a lot of times you're sitting around waiting to see what's the governor going to do. So priority legislation for this year, really quickly, Defenders is sponsoring only one bill this year. Part of that is because it's a COVID year, and so I don't foresee a lot of bills making it out. But this bill is an important bill, and it's an exciting opportunity to partner with Assemblymember Ramos, who's from the desert, the California desert area, and who's the first Native American member to serve in the California legislature. We're very excited to be working with him on a desert conservation program bill that would set up a program within the Wildlife Conservation Board to fund grants for wildlife conservation, recreation, cultural access to benefit the California desert. As Pam noted, Defenders of Wildlife has a very robust California program. We work on a lot of issues out in the desert. But even though the desert is one of our largest ecoregions, it's a region that has historically received less money than some of the other more charismatic parts of California, like the Sierra Nevada and the coast. And so we're hoping that this will funnel some additional much needed conservation dollars into the desert to benefit desert tortoise, bighorn sheep, Mojave ground squirrel, the variety of birds that move through there, and then ultimately, hopefully, the Sonoran pronghorn, which is going to be a species that Defenders has been working to reintroduce into the desert. So we're going to be working on that bill. The other sponsor of that bill with us is the Mojave Desert Land Trust, a local group that works in the Joshua Tree area that we work very closely with. Other important bills for this year. There is a lot of legislation on fire. There are some really good bills to promote more prescribed burning, to do more fire and forest resilience work in an ecologically friendly way. And we're going to be supporting those bills. There's some really bad bills to exempt harmful activities from environmental review, and we'll be opposing those bills. There's a number of climate resiliency bills that are moving through the legislature. There's bills to do more coordination in terms of adaptation. There's bills to look at improving more investment in natural and working lands as a carbon sequestration and climate mitigation measure. We have two big bonds that are moving. Well, it'll ultimately become one bond, but the Senate has its version, which is SB 45, authored by Mr. Portantino, and AB 1500, which is authored by Mr. Garcia. Those bills are between $4 and $5 billion. I don't know what number we're going to arrive at, but it's going to be a significant investment in conservation, fire resiliency, and climate resiliency. It could go on the ballot as early as March. More likely, it would be scheduled to go on the ballot in November. But either way, we would need to get the bill out this year. We also have some important bills that are moving forward. Mr. Kalra is got a bill, AB 30, that would improve access to nature for disadvantaged communities. There's AB 223 by Mr. Ward, who's a freshman this year, that would increase penalties for people that are poaching Deadlia. Deadlia is, these are, otherwise go by a name called live forevers. These are succulent plants. Some of them are endangered. And unfortunately, a very robust black market has emerged for taking Deadlia and shipping them over to Asia, which for whatever reason, they've become a very popular item. And there's been mass poaching incidents that have occurred, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife has would like to try to see more fines to try to make it cost prohibitive to folks who want to try to poach Deadlia. They literally go and scrape sides of mountains of these plants, and so it's a big problem all throughout the state, the coast and in the desert, everywhere. Ms. Aguiar Curry, who's from the Davis with Winters area, is doing another bill to increase funding for nesting bird habitat projects, which we're supportive of. Mr. Allen is bringing back his plastic pollution bill that would try to reduce use of plastics, which is important from a wildlife perspective. It also could create a funding stream for wildlife conservation. And Mr. Stern has two important bills. One is on wildlife importation, particularly on trying to have better coordination among California, Washington, and Oregon on trafficking, wildlife trafficking, and then a wildlife connectivity barrier bill, trying to just get more funding into wildlife connectivity. So those are the priority legislation year. I think I saw a question about who decides. This is a conversation that Pam leads among the staff, going through all of the bills. And right now, Defender, just as an FYI, Defenders is tracking somewhere of around 134 bills. And so we go through the bills and we just identify which ones we think are important, which ones we think will be moving, which ones we really want to support, which ones we need to watch, which ones we oppose. So that's how we work through the priority legislation. So just last but not least, none of this work is successful from the environmental side unless people are engaged. And while Defenders of Wildlife and other organizations, have representatives who are working in the legislature, we are not successful unless members engage. We don't give money like a lot of industries do. So we don't write checks to members. We have to influence them through the power of people, the power of press. And so having our members, having Defenders of Wildlife members get engaged makes a huge difference. So, how to get involved is find out who your legislative representatives are if you don't know. When there's opportunities to write to them, supporting or opposing legislation, take that opportunity. Defenders sends out alerts to its members asking for those things. Call your member. A lot of times a phone call makes a big difference. You would be surprised at the offices really react to when they get phone calls. And most importantly, meet with your member. I mean, once we are finally able to meet with people in person, you can still do it via Zoom. But remember, asking for meetings in district offices make a big difference. And then Defenders of Wildlife will be having a virtual lobby day this year. And I want to put a plug in for that. So you can engage that way in the lobby day to meet with your legislative representative. Again, it makes a huge difference because they are very responsive to when constituents are asking them to do things. And then you also have opportunities to raise the profile of issues in the media through writing letters to the editor or authoring opinion pieces in your newspaper. The legislature members pay attention to that, very much so, and the governor does too as well. So with that, there are many opportunities to engage. The most immediate one that's going to come up is going to be this lobby day in June. So with that, I'll end it there.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. And thank you everybody who's been sending these questions in the chat. We really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and open it up to answer some of these. And if any other questions have come up, you're welcome to send them in the chat now. I did get one, but before we address it, I wanted to see, Roy, I see your hands up. Thank you for patiently waiting. Did you have a question for us? Well, feel free to let us know if your question comes up. I did get one here that was sent to me, so I'll read it out for you, Kim and Pam. It is, in my limited experience trying to advocate on behalf of local wildlife conservation in the San Francisco East Bay, and in speaking with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife rep covering my area, it seems like California Environmental Quality Act, so CEQA, doesn't have any real teeth to protect species of special concern, for example, the western burrowing owl. What can be done to strengthen CEQA? Merely requiring compensatory offsets isn't enough.
That is a really good question because we grapple with that quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, and burrowing owl, because they are not a listed species, which frankly, though, they should be, you do have to rely on CEQA. The Department of Fish and Wildlife does have CEQA guidelines and mitigation guidelines, in particular with burrowing owl. So I don't have a perfect answer for you on that. I would say, continue to write, participate in the CEQA process, putting in your comments, citing to the California Department of Wildlife guidelines. One of the things we do is we contact the Department of Fish and Wildlife if a project is moving forward and actively ask them to put in comments as the trustee agency, which is helpful because that puts it into the record. But sometimes you have to move, if nothing happens, you have to move to litigation in order to try to enforce appropriate mitigation. And I would say that CEQA is a challenging law to litigate from, despite its record of being cited as somehow being abused. It's not an easy law for especially nonprofits and citizens who don't have deep pockets to be able to utilize. That's basically what we do, as wildlife advocates. It's not always successful. And quite honestly, with burrowing owl, I'd hate to say this, but I don't think until they're listed that we have really great hooks in terms of trying to get appropriate mitigation. So I do suspect that within the next several years, burrowing owl probably will be listed, because at this point, the only really robust population left in California is in Imperial County.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question. That was a really good one.
There are a couple of questions revolving around access to nature and whether those can align well with wildlife protections. I would say, first and foremost, it depends on what kind of access. I think folks on this call are probably pretty familiar with the fact that some types of very active or aggressive access, like off-road vehicle use, doesn't always work out well for wildlife protection. We see that in the desert, where desert tortoise populations are continuing to decline, despite the fact that the species has been listed for more than 30 years and even has designated critical habitat. That kind of access is obviously very detrimental to species. But there's a lot of different kinds of access like bird watching or, kind of passive recreation like hiking or backpacking that can align just fine with wildlife protections. And when we talk about access to nature, California is a huge and diverse state. We have almost 40 million human inhabitants, but unfortunately, access to nature is not equal among all of our human friends and neighbors here in California. And there are many, many places in California that are considered park poor, where they don't have access to open space readily, where they can just go out and enjoy a park or open lands, public lands. And so the effort to try to create better equal access to nature is one that that our friend and sponsor of the Access to Nature bill, Ash Kalra, is trying to push forward. Kim, do you have anything else you wanted to comment on that point?
No, I just, I think that it's going to be in some ways very case specific. And I think you're right. I mean, it depends a lot on the type of access that we're looking for. Or that people would like to have. There's lighter ways to be on the land than other ways. It's going to depend on the reason why the area was identified and secured for conservation. So there may be instances where access needs to be restricted for certain times of the year because there may be nesting issues, or, so it depends if it's for a specific species, that might limit some of the access. But with that being said, I think we believe that there's a lot of common ground there, particularly with disadvantaged communities who have not had access to nature at all. And that part of the effort to get more access to nature is that it improves that. Well, one, it's I think a human quality of life issue, which we want to be able to promote. But the other is it's an environmental education opportunity where the more people have the ability to get out in nature, those are people that then understand the value of nature and are then willing to be advocates and prioritize it. And that's the next generation of people who will be doing the policy work. That could be our next generation of scientists, of biologists, of policy people. And so we want to be able to have everyone be able to get on a bus or in their car or walk and be able to get outdoors and appreciate it, because it's hard to value something you can't experience and appreciate.
Great. If there's one more question, we probably have time for it, but we're nearing the end here, so feel free to send it. Or, I see your hand up there, Bill. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I realize we're kind of you're a California-based discussion today, but Defenders of Wildlife is a national organization. I support it very much. You're a great organization. I was shocked to see a documentary a couple weeks ago about the animal hunting contests going on in West Texas. They have contests every weekend with as many as 700 teams, and there's 4 shooters armed to the gills with automatic weapons that go out and trap bobcats, cougars, wolves, rabbits, anything they can. And whatever team captures or kills the most animals wins $15,000. And they do it for fun. They throw all the cougars, all the bobcats, all the wolves. They've killed off all the wolves. Now they're after bobcats. They throw them in the trash. They put them on flatbed trailers and throw them in the trash. I don't know if Defenders of Wildlife even knows this is going on, but it's an ongoing thing. Every weekend in West Texas, they slaughter all of these animals for sport. There's no law against it. It's legal. What can we do about that? I mean, they've killed off all the wolves. Now they're going to kill off all the bobcats. Whatever. They go after anything.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. We agree that's a despicable practice, and I will make sure that I talk to our Southwest director about that. We have recently expanded our Southwest program into Texas, My assumption is that we are aware of it. I will note that here in California, Defenders has supported efforts to take away the incentives for killing contests. So no longer now through our Fish and Game Code can prizes be awarded for such contests. We have coyote killing contests here in California as well. And so at least we have decentivized them, but we agree with you that it's a despicable practice and it must be stopped. And I really appreciate your comment on that. And I know we have some more comments in the chat, but we want to be cognizant of time. We've got about 2 more minutes. I don't know if there's a quick one. And Monica, did you want to give one last note of our paint night and the lobby day?
I would love to. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Bill, for bringing that up. And thank you all for these questions. You're welcome to reach out to me via email. You should all have my email by now if anything else comes up. But I did want to quickly share my screen with you one more time, just so I can show you some details about an upcoming event we have that you may enjoy. It is our Sea Otter Paint Night, and that will be on April 1st. It is not a joke, I promise. And it's going to be a really cool event where we get to learn how to paint a sea otter with a fantastic artist who is up in Alaska. So this will be a partnership with our programs in Alaska as well as the Pacific Northwest. And then we also have our California Lobby Day, which is in June on June 17th. So if you're interested in anything that Pam or Kim talked about today, this will be a great opportunity that we'll set up for you to chat with your legislators and touch base with them. Finally, thank you so much again for joining us. I just put in the chat the link to a survey. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple moments to provide us with some feedback about today, that would be great. And I see it's 1 o'clock. So thanks again, everybody. We really appreciate you being here.